Hey everyone, Eric here, and today we're going old school. This is a technique we used to use back in the old Flash days, and if you're on debut, you don't have smart actions. If you're on an old version of the software, you may not have smart actions. And even if you're on Pro, you may not want to use too many smart actions because those things get in there and they conflict with one another. And if you've got a simple character, think Finn from Adventure Time, for instance, for your arm and leg bends, you don't really need a smart action. So let's discuss how to do that. If you've got questions, ask them in the comments. And if you like it, go ahead and subscribe. So let's get started. Before we get started, this is the technique that I'm going to be using. And so we'll get out my little Charlie the Chimp here. There she is. I'm going to hide the sleeve though, because let's look at that arm, and I'll zoom in on it somewhat. And there's no smart action here. If I bend the arm, it stays clean at the elbow. There's no pinching. And it's good for an older style design of a character. The bicep isn't expanding as the arm changes or anything like that. But there's a lot of animation out there that doesn't worry about that, and that's the style I'm working on in here. And like I said, there's no smart action involved. So let's see how that gets set up in a fresh document. So here we are in a brand new document, and I'm using the Moho debut mode here, so I don't even have access to smart actions. And what I'm going to do is start by creating the joint. I'll call this the arm. So let's start by creating the elbow joint. I'm going to get my draw shape tool. I'm going to make sure in the control bar at the top that I have the oval selected for that tool. And then I'm going to hold down Shift on my keyboard, click, and drag. And when you do that, it guarantees you a perfect circle. I'll just move that here so that little center is not overlapping, because that will hide what I'm doing a little bit. Now I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to hit Escape to deselect it all and switch to the Add Points tool. I'll move the cursor over the top vector in this circle. When you see the green dot and you have auto weld turned on in the control bar with this, so green dot, I will click and I will drag down until the green dot appears on the bottom vector. Let go. That's created a line between the two of them. I'm going to mouse over the left. There's my green dot. Drag to the right. There's my green dot. Let go. And there we have the crosshairs. That point where the two bluish lines cross is the dead center of that circle. So that's our joint. So I'm going to rename this layer elbow. I'm going to build this in layers so it's a little easier to see what I'm doing. So that means we have to do this. I'm going to go right click on that elbow and click Quick Settings. And you're only seeing half of it right now. It's kind of off the screen. But you can see what you need to see here. Under Details, you can select Paths. So I'm going to check that. And I'm going to click the Apply button, which is a little off the screen there, but you'll see it. And then I'll just click to, oops, didn't mean to create a new point. I'll click Away. And now when I create a new layer, and I'm on that layer, you can still make out the lines, the outlines from the elbow layer. And it's important that you're able to see these. So I'm going to actually move the elbow to the top because it's easier to see what you're doing when that circle's on the top to start with. So I'll call this layer here upper arm. And I'm going to go back to my Add Shape tool, and I'm going to get the Rectangle tool. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my cursor as close to the bottom vector of that circle, but I'm on the upper arm layer, not on the elbow layer now. Click and drag, and I'm trying to line up the top vector, top right vector of that rectangle with that circle as well. And then I'm going to zoom way in, and I can see I missed a bit. You can see that that vector is not right on the line. So I'm going to just deselect everything. I'm going to grab this, and I'm going to bring it up. And I can't really see the vector on the circle. That's because I'm directly over it. So that's a good thing. There it is. I'm going to move it over. And now they're both straight and both hiding it. And let me zoom down and zoom in on that one. And it's really close, but might as well just make it perfect. There we go. That's my upper arm. Let me just select those 2 points, get my transform points tool, and just drag that out a little bit. Get a bit of a longer upper arm. I'm holding down shift so they don't go up and down. It's keeping it straight. And now I'm actually going to create the lower arm, and instead of just carefully creating a brand new one, I can, for this, just duplicate that layer and rename it lower arm. And then on the lower arm layer, I'm gonna just click in the middle with the select tool. That selects all 4 points. I'm gonna get my transform points tool. So the whole rectangle for the lower arm layer is selected. I'm gonna hold down shift, and then I'm just gonna drag to the right. Let's get that centered. Tricky part, getting it all. There we go. And that worked pretty well, but I can see that that forearm, even when I held down shift, got off a little bit. So I'm just going to click with the transform points tool again and move it up so until that line is directly over the line down the middle of the circle, and that point is right on the circle's outline. And then I'm going to slide up to the top, and actually that's gotten a little bigger somehow, so I'm just going to deselect it all, hit escape key. I'm going to grab that point only and bring it down, so again it is right over top. This is the most difficult part. And then this line, it's getting a bit wider there, so I'm just going to bring it in. And actually for a forearm, usually it would start getting a little smaller towards the wrist anyway. So there we go. We've got that. I'm going to go ahead and hide the elbow for a second because you can see there is an outline on lower arm. There's a stroke right down the middle of the arm. Let's hide that. So I'm going to get my hide edge tool, click that. You're still seeing something because that's the one from the upper arm. So I switch to the upper arm layer and hide that one. Now I'll turn that back on, and we can still see the crosshairs. And everything appears to be lined up pretty well. So that's the hardest part of this. There's a bit more way zooming in to make sure things are good, but that was the hard part. So now I'm going to create a bone layer. And I'm going to go ahead and select all 3 of these, click and drag them into the bone layer, let go. And remember, you can tell that they're in the bone layer because they've been indented a little bit now that they're in there. Another way to tell is to just click that little arrow next to the bone layer, and they've gone away because they're hidden inside. If they didn't go away, then you missed. So let's show them again. And so now that I'm in the bone layer, I'll just get my add bones tool, and let's just create a base bone here that the arm will come off of, that will control it. And this doesn't have to touch. Some people worry about touching their elbows to the spine. Some people have their reasons. I don't. So I'm just going to get my Add Bones tool. With this bone still selected, it'll make it the next bone a child. So I'm going to click right at the joint where the shoulder would be. And I'm just going to drag until that bone tip is as close to the crosshairs as possible. And then I'm going to let go, and I'm going to deselect by hitting the escape key. And this is where I zoom in again. And this may be a little hard to see, but when you're doing it, you'll be able to see well enough, I think. I will now grab the Transform Bone tool, click in that little red circle near the tip, and just line it up dead center on that pink crosshairs. And another way to see that better is just temporarily. Let me go to that. I'll select that shape and change the interior color to, let's see, that's pink, so let's make it blue. Just temporarily. There. Now you can see it a bit better, can't you? All right. I only changed it to blue so you could see it better. There's nothing technical. There. Now that bone tip is right on the crosshairs. That's good. So that's the upper arm bone. Zoom back out somewhat. With that bone selected, the next bone will be its child for the forearm. So I'll get my Add Bone tool. I'll click right on the end of that bone that I created and create another one for the lower arm. All right. Now this probably isn't going to work very well with bone strength turned on. See how everything is kind of pinching and going wild? So I'm not going to use bone strength at all for this technique. I'll get my bone strength tool. I'll select all. And I'm just going to click and drag to the right. To the left, to the left. And you got to be really careful. Watch this number, bone strength number in the control bar. Make sure it's 0. That way there's absolutely no bone strength at all. So if I then went back and moved these right now, nothing is moving with the bones. That's good. We don't want any bone strength affecting things. So I'll go to the upper arm layer, and in the bone section of the menu I'll get the select bone, and I will select the upper arm bone. Then I'll switch over to the bind points tool at the right hand side. You can still see my upper arm bone is selected, so I'll just click in the middle of that. You can see it selects all 4 points, and I will come up to the control bar and click bind points. Step 1. I want to go to the lower arm. I'll get my select bone tool from the bone section of the toolbar for that layer. Click the lower arm bone. I'll get my bind points tool again. Click on that lower arm. Make sure all 4 points are selected. Click bind points. And we're going to bind the elbow circle to the upper arm bone. So that select bone tool, select it, get the bind points tool, click on that circle, bind points. So let's take a look at what happens. We'll go back to the bone layer, and there we go. You can see it's going nice and cleanly. And so the last thing I'm going to do right now is go back to my elbow layer. I'll select that shape. I will get my eyedropper from next to the color, drag over into the arm. Now they're all the same color. Now I want this circle to stay so it creates the joint when the arms separate out. So I'm going to go ahead and move it to the bottom, and I'm going to be careful. See, it just went out of the bone layer. See how it's not indented anymore and it's sticking out? I'll move it up one. There it is. Be careful to keep it in the bone layer. And now, I've got a nice clean joint. And there's a couple of things that happen. One is that gives that feeling of the crease in the arm as it bends. And it's good to have the lower arm on top to get that properly, which I do. And let me show you what would happen if I didn't leave. If I didn't leave the outline on that circle. So I'll turn these back on. Everything looks okay right now. I'll come back up to the bone layer and manipulate that bone again. And now that without the outline on that circle, it breaks. The elbow doesn't have a clean line as it bends. So that is why, hide these two, that is why you want to have that elbow joint left behind and with an outline on it, but you just put it beneath the other two parts. And that is exactly how you do it. And if you're on Pro, there's a way to use a simple smart action that isn't complicated enough to really interfere with anything else to keep the elbow from doing this. If you bend it too far, it kind of comes in and touches. But usually it's not going to go that far. And if you're on debut, if you don't have access to smart actions, it doesn't really matter. And never be afraid to animate the points during your animation. Bend it that far, and I'll go to the lower level. And I want it not to go quite that far, so let's go back a few. That's about how far I want it to go right there. Right about there. So I'm going to just select this point, and I can freeze selected points in the draw menu. See, it's just created a keyframe for just this one point. And now I'll go to the next frame and I will move it up a bit, or I can just go all the way down here to the end of the bend and move it up a bit. Let's see how that worked. It looks a little strange, but with a bit of practice, and let me bring that in a bit, with a bit of practice, you'll be able to get a decent bend. I think part of the problem is that one there. I'll take that back out. Bring that further in. There we go. So don't be afraid to bend the arm, to manipulate the points a bit to get the animation you want. And then when I straighten that arm out again, come back out here. I've messed that up completely, but hey, I'll go back to this lower arm. I will select that point. I will get the transform points tool, and I will just go ahead and click this reset for the position, and there it goes. So again, what I did was if If I move this point anywhere from where it originally was and click this reset with transform point tool, it pops back to where it belongs. So you can, if that line touching the other side bothers you, spend a bit of time adjusting it and keep it from happening just by animating the point. So that's your workaround if that really bothers you. I normally wouldn't worry about it. You may not ever bend your arm quite that far. So again, I hope you found this useful. Feel free to ask questions in the comments. And if you haven't and you like this, subscribe, and thank you very much.